Hello folks, and welcome to another episode of How the Heck Do I Draw a Face? Today we're going to focus on the nose. Obviously, a nose is not a rectangular shape. It's actually more of a triangular shape like this, right? And then it protrudes outward, looks kind of like a cone maybe. But most noses are generally about 2/3 of the distance between this point between the eyes and the spot where the bottom of the nose is. So you can take this part, which is, we made this a 2 inches by 3 inches tall, because there's a nice general rule that the width, I'm going to write this right at the bottom, the width of your nose is approximately, I'm going to try and spell that out, 2/3 of the height. So if you're ever trying to decide, if you're just drawing a nose all by itself, then you can draw the nose and say, okay, how wide do I need to make it? It's going to be about 2/3 of the height. So if we broke this evenly into thirds, since this is a very convenient 3 inches tall, 1 inch is a third, 2 inches is a third. So now it's broken into 3 equal parts. So if you know that this is how tall you want your nose to be, then the width is going to be 2 of those parts. That's a nice general rule. And whenever we're trying to put the nose on here, then we need to be able to center it right in the middle of this point. So since this is 2 inches, 1 inch is right at the center point. So we can kind of aim the triangle toward that point. There aren't very many notes, but please make sure that you are writing these notes as we learn them. Now, whenever you're placing your nose, we know that your eyes are at this point right here. So I'm going to put the corners of the eyes right here. There's your little tear ducts there, because we know that the nose is placed between them. Now, let's put a little bit of a triangle here. I'm going to round it because guess what? Your nose does not have corners, right? So we're going to fill in this little part down here. We're going to kind of put a little curve. We're going to put a little curve in here to get rid of those corners. And then we're going to gently, very lightly, I'm talking super light, we're going to put a little sketchy line. We do not have lines on our nose, so we don't want to see those later. If you put this really super dark, then you're not going to be able to erase those lines or get rid of those lines. But notice how we have a nice general shape to our nose now, pretty triangular. Now let's label the parts to the nose. This right here, right down the center, this is the part that is going to stick out the most. And because it sticks out the most, it's going to be the brightest section. The bridge is the topmost part, and we're going to label that, because if we talk about the nose and I say you need to pop the highlights on the bridge of your nose, then you need to know exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to label it, and we're going to just put a little note that the bridge is the brightest. Then down here, in general, an approximate generic nose, your nostrils will come up to at least about 1/3. Some people are slightly less, and some people are slightly more. But a nice general rule is that you are going to have your nostrils fill up this lower third. So it's a good thing that we're proportional, because we already figured out where the thirds were. Now, a nose has lots of circles. It's very spherical in spots, right? It sticks out the most right in the center, and it's got spheres. And then it's got a couple of smaller spheres next to it where your nostrils are. So what I like to do in order to be able to shade really nicely is to put a really light circle right in the middle, and then have a couple of overlapping circles. So notice how I'm doing this lightly, because your nose isn't actually circles. So if these circles aren't perfect, is that okay? It's okay. So we're going to put a little curve at the top of the third and a little curve in the bottom middle of the third. Now you see how that's almost a circle basically? And I'm drawing very, very lightly because I don't want to see this later. This is just so that I know where the ball of the nose is, where the part that sticks out the most, and it's going to go in front of the nostrils. So this part is the ball of the nose, and then we're going to put a couple of overlapping little circles here, one on each side. Now, if your circles are slightly smaller on the side, that's okay. If your circles are the same size, that's okay. Because guess what? Everybody has a different shaped nose. There is nothing that says that your nostrils have to look exactly like my nostrils, because they're not going to in reality. Now, see where these little circles overlap right here? That is a good spot for the nostrils. Now, if you put a hard circle all the way around, your nostrils are going to look like pig nose nostrils. We don't want to look like a pig nose. So right here, we're going to put a line right where those two circles start to overlap. It's just a little curve. See that? And then I'm not going to go all the way down to the line. I'm actually just going to stop right above the line. Then where this one overlaps, I'm going to put another little curve. And some people's nostrils, you can see more of it, so they would curve up more. Some people's curve down more. Remember when I said this is a generic nose? There you go. We are not all going to have the same nose. So now we're going to put a little line. This is the parentheses that we did before. We're going to do a big parentheses here, and it's going to go underneath. And notice how this does not touch. These two things have an opening because we're going to put shading in there to make it look more natural. We don't want that to shut. We want that to stay open, okay? And then on this side, we're going to do a little bit darker line, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to curve under, and we're going to leave this part open. It looks a lot more natural that way. And then the last line that we're going to do, because the shading is the big thing on the nose, the last line that we're going to do is just this little curve underneath. Now, some people, you can see this curve that connects, and some people you can't. We actually drew this on our face map, but we didn't put in all these measurements and circles. Now we can label the nostrils. It's T-R-I-L-S. Let's hope I spelled it correctly. And we're going to say that it is approximately, that means it's pretty close generally, to 1/3 of the height. And I am telling you this because I have seen so many students that made little squished tiny nostrils or great big giant nostrils. So this is a nice general area to put your nostrils, about 1/3. So this is 1 of the thirds. Then we're going to also put this thing that goes underneath it. This is a little thing that people always forget. It could go one direction or another direction. I'm going to put it off this direction a little bit. This is your cast shadow. A lot of people don't put the cast shadow. I'm not sure why, because your nose sticks out quite a bit and it has a shadow underneath it. So you've definitely got to remember shadows. Speaking of shadows, we're about to throw down some real nice shadows. So in order to make this look good, we're going to have to take out this little overlappy section right in the center, because we don't want your nose to look like a baseball or a basketball. And we're going to leave these circles, but you're going to make this circle, the middle circle, be on top of the other two. And then we're going to put a very light line right down the middle of the bridge. Want to know why? Because that's the brightest spot. And we're putting a little line, a little reminder line. It's very, very soft because we want this to be very subtle shading. We don't want this to be shading that looks unreal. Now, your nose casts a whole lot of shading, usually one direction more than the other direction, because your lighting is not always straight on. So in order to make it look a little more natural, I like to make one side darker and one side a little lighter. And we'll start off in the darkest area. Do you remember when we learned about the eyes, about how dark it is all up in the eye area? So all this is shadow. Now we're going to do value scale, and I want you to do little circles to make it a little softer. If you have your blender, you can use your Tortillon blending tool, blending stump, to work right now. And all this is just to remind us that that's the dark area. So we're going to continue, and what we're going to do is make this darkest up here, because it's in between your eyes where it's super deep in there, right? We're going to make it darker, and then we're going to slowly get lighter as it comes this way. But it's also going to get from dark to light this way. So it's going to be kind of multiple changes happening. So we're going to go darker up at the top of the bridge. And this is all about practice. I mean, the more that you practice shading, the better that you're going to get. And we're not trying to make this a hard edge line right here, because your face, the shading doesn't stop. It's not a hard edge line. So now we've got some dark to probably middle gray shading. It goes darker to lighter. And then I actually want this part to be really light right up next to the top of that bridge right there. I'm just going to smear it with my finger, but you could also use your blending tool. You'll love using that Tortillon blending stump Never know if I'm saying that right. And then we're actually going to continue this shading a little bit and smear it off that way. There is really no stop to the shading on the face. This stuff will just keep going and going, right? So I don't want you to have a hard edge line on your nose. I really want it to be soft, and I want it to go from dark to light. Now when we get to this little circle right here, we're gonna have to start doing a circular shading, but first we're gonna come on this side and we're gonna shade similar to this side, but we're gonna make it a skosh lighter. So it's gonna be darker up here, but not as dark as that side, because remember, I'm making the light hit a little bit off-center. So it's gonna be slightly lighter than this left side. Now, some people, well, I'm gonna go ahead and soften up this stuff. Keeping the, like if you blend it, if you over blend it, and the bridge of your nose you lose the light on it, then we can come back in and highlight with our eraser. But some people will have a little bump on the bridge of their nose. Some people's will have like really, really straight noses. Some people's kind of dips out and pokes out a little bit right here. So it just depends on who you're drawing. But notice how I made really soft edges. I want it to be really subtle shading and slightly darker up here, and then lighter as it comes forward. And then on the outside edge of the triangle, it's going to be a skosh slightly darker, and then it'll come lighter as it comes toward the bridge of the nose. So it's going to be slightly lighter coming this way. It's going to get lighter coming this way. It's complex shading that you're doing right now. And you can always go back and tweak it a little bit if you'd like. And of course up in here would be more shading, but since we are doing the more light hitting on this side, it's going to be slightly lighter than that. Now down to shading on the ball of your nose, on your nostrils. We have to shade like these are spheres. We want to shade them like spheres. But a nice rule of thumb is to put in about halfway a little rounded reminder line about how to shade. We did this when we shaded the apples. We have to remember to shave in curves, and that's going to help you be able to make it more realistic, because if you just shade flat like we did here, it's going to look like a flat nose. So let's start with the one in the center because it's in front, and we're going to go real dark on the curve. It's going to be dark to light, and about here would be middle gray, right? So we're going to go dark to middle gray about halfway up. A lot of students get really scared of putting gray shading all over their face and their nose. They think that it's going to look bad, but it really is just going to look like black and white photography. So don't be scared to use your shading and make your skin have all these different tones. It's actually going to look really beautiful. Now, we got to the middle gray part. I'm going to darken it up a little bit more down on the bottom. We got to the middle gray part, and I don't want it to just have a hard stop. I want it to slowly get lighter and lighter and be like a nice round sphere circle thing happening. So I'm going to put a little bit of the lightest stuff. Then I'm going to take my finger or my Tortillon blender stump and just do a little circle like that. Now, if you blend it a little too much, you can always go back in and pop a little highlight on the end of your nose. Most people's nose kind of pops out a little bit. You don't have to have it go all the way around. It might be that you have a really straight nose and you need that whole little highlight. But just smearing it around is going to make it look nice and three-dimensional. Now these look really flat, so we have to go back through and do the same thing for each of these. We're going to be darker on the bottom, and we're gonna address this part in a second. Right now I'm just going to kind of like shade it in, but we're going to address the nostrils in a second on the inside. We're going to shade it in darker, and we're going to curve it. Nice pretty curves, because it is a sphere. And once it gets to that middle gray part there, make sure it curves up around the edges. The only spot you're going to have a line on the nose is going to be right at the edge here and maybe at the top of the nostril. You don't really see a lot of lines. So I'm going to take my finger and smear it around. Make it nice and smooth. Your skin is smooth, so you're trying to make smooth shading. Here we go. And if you want, you can pop a little highlight back in there if you over smudged it. And then we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, now I've put in that dark to middle gray, and I'm going to just add in, see how I'm still curving it? I'm adding that real light stuff, and then I'm going to use the stuff that's on there and kind of curve it around. And see, I'm doing little circles, right? Because it's on a circle, so you may as well do a little circular shading. Now let's really focus in on the inside of the nostrils. The inside of the nostrils, no light can get in there, so it is very black. But if you just put a black elliptical little shape, it's going to look like a pig nose. So what we're going to do is a dark shadow, and then we're going to blend it so that it blends in with the shadow that's already there. And I may have to lift it up a little so you can kind of see it. We want it to slowly change to the middle gray, or the dark gray that's down there. It's not middle gray, it's more of a dark gray. Okay, see the difference? So it slowly changes to dark gray, and it looks more deep now than this one. This one looks kind of flat. So we do like dark gray to, or black to dark gray, just real subtle, soft. And then the same thing over here. And just slowly just lighten off the pressure so it doesn't look like a solid little circle. It just changes slowly to the dark gray, like it's a hole, which is what it is. It's a nostril hole, right? The cast shadow, there is this little thing down here called the philtrum. Now we haven't learned about the mouth yet, but the philtrum is a dip underneath the nose. And we're going to put some shadow here, just enough to fill this in. We'll talk more about the philtrum later. Now your shadow also has a value scale. If you don't put value scale in your shadow, it's gonna look really weird. So we're gonna start about the same shadow. What is this? Dark gray. We wanna do the same color that it's right up next to it so it doesn't look too stark. And then we're going to just slowly let it get lighter. I'm just going straight for this area because it's more flat. It's not so flat because there's the philtrum and your skin actually kind of slopes downward on your mouth. But we're going to just do this cast shadow because it adds to the realism, and it looks very weird if you don't have a shadow underneath the nose. We don't want you to look weird. So I've put a generic dark to light, or excuse me, middle gray to light gray, probably. You can't go all the way to white in a shadow. Smear it around a smidgen, and then I'm also going to darken it right underneath the nose, just a smidgen, because this is the philtrum. And I don't want it to be hard lines, but it's this little area. Some people have more prominent philtrums than others. And then on either side of the philtrum, it's going to be slightly darker, because what happens is that these little parts pop up a little higher, and these little parts go a little lower. So even in your shadow, it's very complex. I'm gonna make it all nice and smooth. Now we're gonna talk more about the mouth later, but that is the nose in a nutshell.